This is Tom Duty, middle-aged American living in New Jersey near the Lincoln Tunnel. If you were to visit my website, you would type Howdy Doody into Google. You'll find the correct spelling of the famous puppet. You then combine Tom Duty and a Google search for my site. From the New York Times, Trump engaged in suspect tax schemes as he reaped riches from his father, published by the New York Times. October 2nd, 2018, by David Barstow, Susan Craig, and Russ Bootner. The president has long sold himself as a self-made billionaire, but a Times investigation found that he received at least $413 million in today's dollars from his father's real estate empire, much of it through tax dodges in the 90s. President Trump participated in dubious tax schemes during the 1990s, including instances of outright fraud, greatly increased the fortune he received from his parents. An investigation by the New York Times has found Mr. Trump won the presidency of proclaiming himself a self-made billionaire. He's long insisted his father, the legendary New York City builder Fred C. Trump, provided almost no financial help. But the Times investigation, based on a vast trove of confidential tax returns and financial records, reveal that Trump received the equivalent of at least $413 million from his father's real estate empire, starting when he was a toddler, continuing to this day. Much of the money came to Mr. Trump because he helped his parents, dodge taxes. He and his siblings set up a sham corporation to disguise millions of dollars as gifts from their parents. Records and interviews show. Records indicate that Mr. Trump helped his father take improper tax deductions worth millions more. He also helped formulate a strategy to undervalue his parents' real estate holdings by hundreds of millions of dollars on tax returns, sharply reducing the tax bill when those properties were transferred to him and his siblings. These maneuvers met little resistance from the IRS, the Times found. The president's parents, Fred and Mary Trump, transferred well over $1 billion in wealth to their children, which could have produced a tax bill of $550 million under the 55% tax rate imposed on gifts and inheritance. The Trumps paid a total of $52 million, about 5%, the records show. The president declined repeated requests over several weeks to comment for this article, but a lawyer for Mr. Trump, Charles Harder, provided a written statement on Monday, one day after the Times sent detailed description of its findings. The New York Times allegation of fraud and tax evasion are 100% false and highly defamatory. Mr. Harder said, "There is no fraud or tax evasion by anyone. The facts upon which the Times bases its false allegations are extremely inaccurate." Mr. Harder sought to distance Mr. Trump and his tax strategies used by family, saying the president has delegated those tasks to relatives and tax professionals. President Trump has virtually no involvement whatsoever in these matters. He said the affairs were handled by other Trump family members who were not experts themselves and therefore relied entirely upon aforementioned licensed professionals to ensure compliance with the law. The president's brother, Robert Trump, issued a statement on behalf of the Trump family. Our dear father, Fred C. Trump, passed away June 1999. Our beloved mother, Mary Ann Trump, passed away August 2000. All appropriate gift and state taxes were filed, required taxes paid. Our father's estate was closed in 2001 by both the Internal Revenue Service and the New York State tax authorities, and our mother's estate was closed in 2004. Our family has no other comment on these matters that happened more than 20 years ago. Would appreciate your respect and privacy of our deceased parents. May God rest their souls. The Times finding raised new questions about Mr. Trump's refusal to release his tax returns, breaking with decades of practice precedents. According to tax experts, it is unlikely that Mr. Trump would be vulnerable to criminal prosecution for helping his parents evade taxes. Because the acts happened long ago, they're past statute of limitation. There's no limit, however, to civil fines for tax fraud. The fines are based on interviews with Fred C. Trump employees and advisors of more than 100,000 pages of documents describing the inner workings and immense profitability of his empire. They include documents culled from public sources, mortgages, deeds, probate records, financial disclosure reports, regulatory records, and civil court files. The investigation also draws on tens of thousands of pages of confidential records, bank statements, financial audits, accounting ledgers, cash disbursements reports, invoices, and canceled checks. Most notably in the documents include more than 200 tax returns from Fred Trump, his companies, and various Trump partnerships and trusts. While the records do not include the president's personal tax returns and reveal little about his recent businesses, dealings at home and abroad, dozens of corporate partnerships and trusts, tax returns offer the first public accounting of the income he received for decades from various family enterprises. 11 takeaways from the Times investigation. What emerges from this body of evidence is a financial biography of the 45th president, fundamentally at odds with the story Mr. Trump has sold in his books, his TV shows, and his political life. Mr. Trump's version of how he got rich, he was the master dealmaker who broke free of his father's tiny outer borough operation and parlayed a single $1 million loan from his father, I had to pay him back with interest, into a $10 billion empire that would slap the Trump name on hotels, high-rises, casinos, airlines, golf courses all over the world. In Mr. Trump's version, it is always his guts and gumption that overcame setbacks. Fred Trump was simply a cheerleader. I built what I built myself, Mr. Trump has said, a narrative that was long amplified by often credulous coverage by news organizations, including the Times. Certainly a handful of journalists and biographers, notably Wayne Barrett, Gwenda Blair, David K. Johnson, Timothy O'Brien, have challenged the story, especially the claims of him being worth $10 billion. They describe how Mr. Trump piggybacked off his father's banking connections to gain a foothold in Manhattan real estate. They poked holes into his go-go talking point about the $1 million loan, citing evidence that he actually got $14 million. They told how Fred Trump had once helped his son make a bond payment on an Atlantic City casino by buying $3.5 million in chips. But the Times investigation of the Trump family finances is unprecedented in scope and precision, offering the first comprehensive look at the inherited fortune and tax dodge that guaranteed Donald J. Trump a gilded life. The reporting makes clear that in every era of Mr. Trump's life, his finances were deeply intertwined and dependent on the father's wealth. By age 3, Mr. Trump was earning $200,000 a year, today's dollars, from his father's empire. He was a millionaire by age 8. By the time he was 17, his father had given him part ownership of a 52-unit apartment building. Soon after Mr. Trump graduated from college, he was receiving the equivalent of $1 million a year from his father. The money increased with the years to more than $5 million annually in his 40s and 50s. Fred Trump real estate empire was not just scores of apartment buildings, it was also a mountain of cash. Tens of millions of dollars in profits building up inside his business, banking records show. In one 6-year span, from 88 through 93, Fred Trump reported $109 million in total tax income, now equivalent to $210 million. It was not unusual for tens of millions in treasury bills and certificates of deposit to flow through a personal bank account each month. Fred Trump was restless and creative in finding ways to channel his wealth to his children. He made Donald not just a salaried employee, but also the property manager, landlord, banker, and consultant. He gave him loan after loan. Many never repaid. He provided money for his car, money for his employees, money to buy stocks, money for his first Manhattan office, and money to renovate those offices. He gave him 3 trust funds. He gave him shares in multiple partnerships. He gave him 10,000 Christmas checks. He gave him laundry revenue from his buildings. Much of his givings was structured to sideline gift inheritance tax using methods tax experts described to the Times as improper or possibly illegal. Although Fred Trump became wealthy with the help of the federal housing subsidies, he insisted that it was manifestly unfair for the government to tax his fortune as it passed to his children. When he was in his 80s and beginning to slide into dementia, evading gift and estate tax became a family affair, with Donald Trump playing a crucial role. Interviews and newly obtained documents show. The line between legal tax avoidance and illegal evasion is often murky. It's constantly being stretched by inventive tax lawyers. There is no shortage of clever tax avoidance tricks that have been blessed either by the courts or the IRS itself. The richest Americans almost never pay anything close to the full freight. But tax experts believe the Times findings said that the Trumps appeared to have done more than exploit legal loopholes. They said the conduct described here represented a pattern of deception and obfuscation, particularly about the value of Fred Trump's real estate that repeatedly prevented the IRS from taxing large transfers of wealth to his children. The theme I see here through all of this is valuations. They play around with valuations in extreme ways, said Lee Fort Tritt, a University of Law professor. In a leading expert in gift taxation, there are dramatic functions departing on their purpose. The manipulation of values to evade tax was central to one of the most important financial events in Donald Trump's life. In an episode never before revealed, Mr. Trump and his siblings gained ownership of most of his father's empire on November 22, 1997, a year and a half before Fred Trump's death. Critical to the complex transaction was the value put on the real estate. The lower its value, the lower gift tax. The Trump dodged hundreds of millions of gift tax by submitting tax returns that grossly undervalued the properties, claiming they were worth just $41 million. The same set of buildings would be sold off the next decade for more than 16 times that amount. The most overt fraud was All County Building and Supply Maintenance, a company formed by the Trump family in 1992. All County ostensible purpose was to be the purchasing agent for Fred Trump's buildings, buying everything from boiler to cleaning supplies. It did no such thing. Records and interviews showed instead All County siphoned millions of dollars from Fred Trump's empire by simply marking up purchases already made by his employees. Those millions, effectively untaxed gifts, Tom Duty, DHL, can I help you? You're interested in the Union City location, 20th and Bergen Line? I answer for multiple locations. You are calling about Union City or Arizona? Union City, 20th and Bergen Line, right? Yes, I'll send you the. No. That's 48th Street. That's obsolete. The only location I answer for in Union City is the 20th and Bergen Line. I can text you the boss's number and the business address if that would help. Okay. Yeah, notary and DHL. The boss is Esperanza. You'll get her cell phone in just a minute. You're gonna have to ask Esperanza. She's a one-woman show. So, typically 8, sometimes 9, 10. She rarely surprises anyone by being early, but she does a lot of work by appointment. So that's why you'll get her cell phone. You can make arrangements with her. You're welcome. The same set of buildings would be sold off over the next decade for 16 times that amount. The most overt fraud was All County Building Supply Maintenance Company, formed by Trump's family in 1992. All counties. After the article was published on Tuesday, a spokesman for New York State Department of Taxation, Finance, dígame. Okay, PABT. Ciao, ciao. Ciao, ciao. After this article was published, on Tuesday, a spokesman for the New York's Department of Taxation and Finance said the agency was reviewing the allegations and vigorously pursuing all appropriate areas of investigation. All told, the Times documented 295 streams of revenue that Fred Trump created over 5 decades to enrich his sons. In most cases, his 4 other children benefited equally, but over time, as Donald careened more from one financial disaster to the next, his father found ways to give him substantially more money, records show. Even so, in 1990, according to previous secret depositions, Mr. Trump tried to have his father will rewritten in a way that Fred Trump, alarmed and angered, feared could result in his empire being used to bail out his son's failing businesses. Of course, the story of how Donald Trump got rich cannot be reduced to handouts from his father. Before he became president, his single achievement was building the brand of Donald J. Trump, self-made billionaire, a brand so potent it generated hundreds of millions of dollars in revenue through TV shows, books, and licensing deals. Constructing that image required more than Fred Trump's money. Just as important were his son's pre-natural marketing skills and always be closing competitive hustle. While Fred Trump helped finance the accoutrements of wealth, Donald Trump made master self-promoter, spun himself into a seductive narrative. Fred Trump money, for example, helped build Trump Tower, the talisman of privilege, and established his sons as a major player in New York. But Donald Trump recognized and exploited the iconic power of Trump Tower as a primary stage for both The Apprentice and his presidential campaign. The biggest payday he ever got from his father came long after Fred Trump's death. It happened quietly, without the usual Trumpian news conference. May 2004, when Mr. Trump and his siblings sold off the empire his father had spent 70 years assembling, with the dream that it would never leave his family. Donald Trump cut $177 million, or $236 million in today's dollars, before he turned 20. Fred Trump had already built and sold his first home. At age 35, he was building hundreds of houses a year in Brooklyn, Queens. By 45, he was some of the biggest apartment complexes in the country. Aside from an astonishing work ethic, sleeping is a waste of time, he liked to say. The growth reflected on shrewd application of mass production techniques. The Brooklyn Daily Eagle called him the Henry Ford of home building. He would erect scaffolding a city block long, so his masons, sometimes working a second shift using floodlights, could throw up a dozen row houses in a week. They sold for about $115,000 in today's dollars. By 1940, American Builder magazine was taking notice, devoting a spread to Fred Trump under the headline, "Biggest One-Man Building Show." The article described a swaggering lone wolf character who paid for everything, wages, supplies, from a thick wad of cash he carried at all times, and whose only help was a secretary answering the phone in a barely bigger than a parking space office. He is his own purchasing agent, cashier, paymaster, building superintendent, construction engineer, and sales director, the article said. It wasn't that simple. Fred Trump had also spent years ingratiating himself with Brooklyn Democratic machine, giving money, doing favors, and making the sort of friends like Abram B. Beam, the future mayor, who could make life easier for a developer. He also assembled a phalanx of plugged-in real estate lawyers, property appraisers, and tax accountants who protected his interest. All these traits, deep experience, nimbleness, connections, relentless focus on the efficient constructions of homes for the middle class, positioned him perfectly to ride the growth wave of federal spending on housing. The wave took shape with the New Deal, grew during World War II, rushed to build military housing, and crested with the post-war imperative to provide homes for returning GIs. Fred Trump would become a millionaire many times over by making himself one of the nation's largest recipients of cheap government-backed building loans, according to Gwendolyn Blair's book, The Trumps, 3 Generations of Builders and a President. Building those same loans became a wellspring of Donald Trump's wealth. In the late 1940s, Fred Trump obtained roughly $26 million in federal loans to build 2 of the largest developments, Beach Haven Apartments near Coney Island, the Shore Haven Apartments a few miles away. Then he set out making his children his landlords. I'm pausing at a video, an embedded video. I'm using this is a reader's note. I stopped the New York Times text. I'm breaking this pause is at a embedded video in the New York Times app, ground lease. I just used a bookmark, and I'm not quite sure how the bookmark works because this entire thing is really one page. This has been Tom. I'm at Port Authority Bus Terminal, which is in New York City near the Lincoln Tunnel. Have a good day, good evening, a restful night's sleep. Ciao.